The best Harvard students gave up. Then a black scholarship girl raised her hand. Have you ever been in a room where everyone else has given up? Where the challenge on the table feels so big, so impossible, that the only sensible thing to do is to walk away. To admit defeat? That's exactly where we are today. In one of the most prestigious classrooms at Sterling University. A place built on legacy, on old money, on names that echo through boardrooms and history books. The air here, it smells like privilege, and on this particular morning, it also smelled like fear. The man at the front of the room was Professor Thorne. 30 years of teaching the best and the brightest. And he had just presented his advanced economic theory class with what he called an academic exercise. But everyone in the room knew it was a test. A cruel one. The problem was projected on the board. A labyrinth of numbers and theories. Mathematically model the impact of systemic inequality on national economic growth over the past 50 years. It was a monster of a question. It needed you to weigh history and politics and human suffering and turn it all into cold, hard math. The reward? A golden ticket. A joint publication in a major international journal. But the deadline? 72 hours. And one by one, they gave up. You could see it on their faces. The calculation. The risk was too high. Why try when you could so publicly fail? Julian Davenport IV, yes, the fourth, heir to a banking dynasty, was the first to pack his leather bag. He muttered something you could just barely hear. My father spent $200,000 so I wouldn't have to deal with this kind of thing. For him, this wasn't an assignment. It was a nuisance. Beneath him, then there was Ilara Zhang. Perfect grades. Perfect pedigree. Daughter of diplomats. She shook her head, not in defeat, but in strategy. It's too risky, she said so calmly. If we don't make it, it will destroy our GPA. It's not worth it. For her, it was a simple equation, and the numbers didn't add up. And just like that, the exodus began. 40 students became 30. 30 became 20. Within minutes, the room was almost empty. Just the sound of the projector fan humming, and the disappointed sigh of Professor Thorne. He watched them go, a grim satisfaction on his face. He'd proven his point. It was impossible, but he was wrong. There was one student left, sitting in the middle of all those empty chairs. Her name was Aaliyah Jones, and if Julian and Ilara were from the world of legacy, Aaliyah was from the world of grit. She wasn't at Sterling because of a family name or a generous donation. She was there on a full scholarship for low-income students. She was the daughter of a custodian, a cleaning lady at Cedar General Hospital back in Millbrook. Her hands, they weren't soft. They were calloused from summers spent working in a packaging plant, saving every single dollar for books, for supplies, for a chance. While the other students saw a terrifying wall of numbers on that board, Aaliyah saw something else. She saw her mother's tired smile after a double shift. She saw her neighbors in Millbrook, pooling money together to help a family avoid eviction. She saw the unbreakable network of people who had nothing, but would give everything for each other. She saw a story she knew by heart, and in the silence of that room, she raised her hand. Professor Thorne looked up, startled. He saw her there, and I wish I could tell you that he saw her potential, her courage. But he didn't. He saw a problem. He saw a scholarship student who was getting above her station. "Miss Jones," he said, and his voice was coated in this thick, fake kind of pity. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a doctoral-level problem. Perhaps it would be better to focus on your basic subjects first." It was a dismissal, a gentle, polite, Devastating shove back into the box he thought she belonged in. But Aaliyah had spent a lifetime being shoved into boxes. And she had learned how to stand her ground. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. Not even a little. "With all due respect, sir," she said. "You said that whoever could solve it would be guaranteed a publication. You didn't mention any restrictions." The silence in that room got deeper, heavier. Professor Thorne exchanged a look with his teaching assistant. It was a look Aaliyah knew all too well. It was the same look she got when she walked into a fancy store or applied for an internship. The look that said, "You don't belong here." Finally, he nodded, but it wasn't a nod of encouragement. It was a challenge, a cruel one. "Very well. 72 hours. No extensions. No excuses." As Aaliyah walked to the front of the room to copy down the problem, her worn pencil in hand, she noticed something. Something all the other students, in their rush to escape, had completely missed. Hidden in the complex variables was a tiny, almost invisible phrase: community resilience factors. For Julian, for Alara, for Professor Thorne, those were just words, academic jargon. But for Aaliyah Jones from Millbrook, that was the key. That was the secret door. That was her life. What she didn't know was that her decision to raise her hand had already started a storm. By the next day, the news had spread across campus like wildfire. The scholarship student had taken on the impossible problem. And the phones of the wealthy students, they started lighting up. Sound of phone notifications pinging. A private chat group called Sterling Elite was buzzing with messages. "It was brutal," Julian typed. $50, she doesn't even show up to class tomorrow," Ilara added. "She's probably realized she's out of her league. It's almost cruel to let her try." A girl named Victoria Ashford, whose family owned half the media industry, wrote the cruelest one. "Poor thing. She's probably in the library right now crying over her books. Someone should film it for posterity." The exact moment reality meets the fantasy of equality. They thought it was a private joke. They had no idea that their cruelty was being seen by the one person they were mocking. Because a boy named Leo Park, a computer engineering major on a merit scholarship, had seen what was happening. He saw the exclusion, the meanness, and he had quietly added Aaliyah to the group chat. He sent her a simple message. "They really think you don't have access to any of this. It's amazing how privilege makes people dumb to certain things." And so, that night, as Aaliyah sat in the silent, cavernous Sterling library, surrounded by towering shelves of books, she wasn't just reading economic theory. She was reading their messages. Every bet against her. Every joke at her expense. And a beautiful, powerful thing happened. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She got focused. She opened a new document. And she began to type. She used their words, their mockery, their absolute certainty of her failure, as data. It was the perfect evidence for her theory. That privilege creates a blind spot, an inability to see strength in anything that looks different from you. Late that night, her phone buzzed. It was 5:30 a.m., her mother's daily call, before her early shift at the hospital started. "Aaliyah? Honey, are you okay?" Her mom's voice, always a little tired, but always full of love, came through the phone. "I'm great, Mom," Aaliyah said, a smile in her voice. "Actually, I think I've discovered something incredible." She started explaining her idea about community resilience, how networks of people with nothing formalized the most powerful economic support systems. Her mother listened, and then she said the most profound thing. "It reminds me of the 2008 recession," her mom said. "While the banks were failing, our community in Millbrook organized. We swapped babysitting for car repairs, shared groceries, kept the lights on for each other. The economists on TV. They could never put that in their graphs, could they? Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. That was it. Exactly it. She wasn't just doing math. She was telling her mother's story. She was telling their story. Just then, a man walked into the library. It was Professor Silva from the sociology department. He carried 2 coffees and a genuine kind smile. He'd heard whispers of what she was attempting. "I hear you're working on the thorn problem," he said, sliding a coffee toward her. "And before you ask, no, he didn't send me. In fact, I'm here against the explicit advice of several colleagues." For the next 2 hours, she showed him her work. His eyes widened. "My God," he murmured, "you're not just solving the problem. You're revolutionizing the way we measure strength." He believed in her. He saw it. As dawn broke over Sterling University, painting the library windows in shades of gold and orange, Aaliyah Jones looked at her screen. The model was complete. The data was irrefutable. The story was told. She closed her laptop. She had done the impossible. But she knew the hardest part wasn't solving the problem. The hardest part was about to begin, walking into that classroom tomorrow and proving to everyone that they had been wrong about her. Wrong about where genius comes from. Wrong about everything. She took a deep breath, ready for the fight. The morning of the presentation, the air in that Sterling University classroom was so thick you could almost taste it. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't curiosity. It was the quiet, buzzing anticipation of a car crash about to happen. Everyone had come to see the show, to watch the scholarship girl finally fall. The room was packed, not just with the usual students, but with professors from other departments, curious onlookers, and even the dean of economics himself, who had just happened to be passing by. They weren't there to learn. They were there to witness a failure. Julian Davenport sat in the front row, a smug, almost predatory smile on his face as he typed on his phone. He was sending one last message to the Sterling elite group. "Get the popcorn ready, folks. The show is about to begin." He didn't know it yet, but he wasn't in the audience. He was part of the exhibit. Professor Thorne walked in, his posture straight, his face a mask of cool authority. He looked at Aaliyah, who was calmly connecting her laptop to the projector. He couldn't help himself. He had to get one last jab in. "Miss Jones," his voice cut through the chatter. It was so quiet, everyone could hear. "I hope you've used these 72 hours to reflect on your academic limitations." He paused, letting the condescension hang in the air. "There's still time to reconsider." Aaliyah looked up from her computer. She didn't flinch. She didn't get angry. She just looked calm. A deep, unshakable calm that comes from knowing you hold the truth in your hands. "Thank you for your concern, Professor," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But I think I've come up with something interesting." She clicked a button, and the first slide appeared. It wasn't a graph or an equation. It was a quote from the writer James Baldwin. "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." The room got a little quieter. The next few slides were a masterclass. Aaliyah began to speak, and she didn't just present numbers. She told a story. Her story. The story of Millbrook. "The problem wasn't impossible," she began, her eyes scanning the room, meeting the gaze of her stunned classmates. "It was just poorly formulated. You were trying to measure economic resilience using tools created by people who never had to be resilient." She showed them graphs, but they weren't the cold, abstract graphs from their textbooks. These graphs had heartbeats. They showed how a community's strength isn't measured in its stock portfolio, but in its ability to share, to support, to survive. She had turned her mother's wisdom, her neighbor's kindness, into rigorous, undeniable mathematical proof. Professor Thorne began to sweat. He could see it. This wasn't a student presentation. This was a revolution, and it was happening in his classroom. He had to stop it. He interrupted her, his voice strained. Interesting in theory, Miss Jones, but where are your primary sources? Your empirical data? Anyone can make pretty models without real evidence. It was his last, desperate move, and Aaliyah was ready for it. A small smile touched her lips. I'm glad you asked, Professor. She clicked to the next slide. It was a complex graph titled, Correlation between Institutional Bias and Academic Arrogance. Then she turned to the audience. Jason, can you help me? From the back of the room, Leo Park stood up, his laptop open. Sure, Aaliyah. The color drained from Julian's face. He fumbled for his phone, but it was too late. Everyone, Leo said, his voice loud and clear. Over the past 72 hours, you've all provided fascinating behavioral data through your WhatsApp groups. He looked directly at Julian, at Alara, at Victoria. Data on how prejudice affects decision-making, on risk aversion, and on the inability to recognize competence. And then he started reading their messages aloud. Asterisk, $50, she won't even show up to class tomorrow. Asterisk, asterisk, she's probably realized she's out of her league. Asterisk, asterisk, it's almost cruel to let her try. Asterisk, asterisk, someone should film her crying for posterity. Asterisk, with each word, the room turned colder. You could hear a pin drop. Victoria Ashford sank so low in her chair she almost disappeared. Ilara Zhang stared at her hands, her face pale with a dawning, horrible shame. Julian looked like he'd been slapped. The silence was absolute. It was the loudest, most deafening silence I have ever heard. Aaliyah took back control. Her voice was gentle but firm. The interesting thing is that you provided the perfect data set to test my hypothesis. You see, privilege creates a massive cognitive blind spot. Note the inverse correlation, she said, pointing to the graph, between demonstrated confidence and actual competence. Professor Thorne was white as a ghost. This is highly inappropriate. Using students' private conversations. And that's when the door opened. Professor Silva walked in, carrying a thick briefcase. His voice boomed across the silent room. Private conversations, Professor Thorne? I'd like you to explain why you thought it appropriate to discuss her performance at social dinners with university donors. Thorne's mouth opened and closed. He had been caught. His own casual cruelty, whispered over champagne, had come back to destroy him. Professor Silva wasn't done. He opened his briefcase. Furthermore, Miss Jones's research was submitted to the Journal of Economic Behavior and the American Economic Review. Both journals have expressed very serious interest. It was over. The battle was won. The room began to empty, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Students shuffled out, avoiding eye contact, their worldview shattered. Julian tried to slip out, but Aaliyah's voice, calm and clear, stopped him. Julian, she said, since you mentioned growing up listening to economic discussions at dinner, would you care to comment on the methodological implications of my approach? He just stood there, opening and closing his mouth, a goldfish out of water. He had nothing. No words, no theories, no clever retorts. Just emptiness. Aaliyah gave a gentle, forgiving smile. No problem. Sometimes it's hard to recognize excellence when it comes from where you least expect it. The aftermath of that day was like a stone dropped in a pond. The ripples spread out and changed everything. Professor Thorne didn't just lose face. He lost his job. He faced a formal investigation and was eventually let go. The last anyone heard, he was working a temporary job, a long way from the hallowed halls of Stirling. But for Aaliyah, the doors flew open. The dean offered her a full research scholarship and direct mentorship. Her protocol, her way of measuring true potential, was adopted by the university. That year, applications from marginalized communities went up by hundreds. Everyone wanted to come to the school where the impossible had happened. The students who had doubted her were humbled, each in their own way. Julian Davenport transferred to a less demanding school overseas, his confidence shattered. Ilara Zhang, she did something surprising. She sought Aaliyah out. She said, "I realize now that I spent 4 years here just memorizing formulas without ever questioning what they were for in real life." She started using her economics knowledge to actually help people. And Victoria Ashford? She simply vanished from social media. The world she'd built online, a world based entirely on her family's status, had collapsed. Years later, Dr. Aaliyah Jones walked across the stage at her graduation, not as a curiosity, but as a summa cum laude graduate. In the audience, wearing a new dress and crying tears of pure joy, was her mother. Her hero. Aaliyah received 3 offers that day: a full PhD at Stirling, a job at the World Bank, and an offer to lead a new research institute. She chose her own path. She became the youngest tenured professor at a rival university, a celebrated author whose books changed how economics was taught. But the most important part of her story happened in her office, years later. A young student, the son of Salvadoran immigrants, hesitated at her door. "Professor Jones?" he said. "Do you have a minute? I'd like to show you an idea I had about measuring community resilience." Aaliyah smiled. She saw herself in his eyes. That same hunger, that same fire. "Of course," she said warmly. "And call me Aaliyah. After all, the best education happens when we eliminate the hierarchies that separate us from real knowledge." Her story proved something, didn't it? Something beautiful and true. That excellence isn't born in fancy cradles. It's forged in necessity. The best revenge against those who try to diminish you isn't to destroy them. It's to build something so extraordinary that their smallness becomes invisible in the light of your greatness. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you don't belong, remember Aaliyah Jones. Remember that every time someone doubts you, they are handing you the fuel for your fire. Genius has no address. It has no last name. It only has an insatiable thirst to turn limitations into opportunities. And your story is just beginning.